Somewhere in northern Canada, there is a town where the streetlights still turn on at night. The houses are fully furnished, and the swimming pool still has water in it. It looks like people live there, but no one has lived there since 1983. Here's the thing, they did not leave slowly. Not over a period of time. People left almost all at once. Within months, an entire community of more than 1,000 people packed up and disappeared, leaving behind homes that still feel lived in. And that is just one place. In another part of the country, an entire section of a town was erased in less than a minute when a mountain collapsed without warning, burying homes and families under millions of tons of rock. Elsewhere, entire communities were forced off land their families had lived on for generations. Not because of disaster, but because someone decided they had to go. And in the far north, workers unknowingly handled radioactive material tied to one of the most destructive weapons ever created, only learning years later what it had done to them. These are not just abandoned places. These are places where something happened. Quickly, suddenly, and in some cases, quietly enough that most people never heard about it. And as we go through them, some of these stories get more unsettling, not less. Let's start with Kitsalt, British Columbia, because this one feels wrong in a very specific way. If you walked into Kitsalt today, you would not think you were in an abandoned town. The buildings are intact, the streets are clean, there's a basketball court, a rec center, even a functioning water system. It looks ready, like people are about to come back, but they never did. Kitsalt was built in the late 1970s as a company town for a molybdenum mine. At its peak, around 1,200 people lived there. Families moved in with the expectation that this would be stable. Kids went to school, people had routines. Then the price of molybdenum collapsed. And when it collapsed hard enough that the entire operation stopped making sense financially. The company made the decision quickly, shut it down. That was it. There was no slow wind down, no gradual decline. Within about a year, the town emptied. People left in a rush. Some took everything. Others did not. There are reports of furniture left behind, cupboards still stocked, everyday objects just abandoned mid-use. And here is where it gets stranger. Decades later, Krishnan Suthantharan bought the entire town. Not part of it, the whole thing. You would expect redevelopment, demolition, something. Instead, he kept it, maintained it. The buildings are still heated, the grass is still cut, the infrastructure is still functioning. And that creates this very strange feeling, because Kitsalt is not decaying the way abandoned places usually do. It is being preserved, almost like someone is waiting. And what makes Kitsalt unusual is not just that it is empty, it is that it could be filled again tomorrow, and everything would still work. Now shift to something very different. A place where there was no time to leave. In 1903, in the town of Frank, Alberta, people went to bed like any other night. Around 4:10 in the morning, Turtle Mountain gave way. And when it happened fast. Approximately 90 million tons of rock broke loose and came crashing down into the valley. Estimates suggest the main slide lasted less than a minute. Less than a minute. Think about that. Entire homes were buried instantly. Streets disappeared. People had no time to react, no warning that this was coming. The force of it pushed debris across the valley floor, burying part of the town and completely covering sections of the railway. Rescue crews came quickly, but conditions were dangerous. The rock was unstable, and there was always the risk of another collapse. Some survivors were found trapped beneath debris, in pockets of space that somehow held. Others were not found at all. The official death toll is estimated between 70 and 90 people, but even that is uncertain. And if you go there today, it still feels recent. The rock field is still there, stretching across the valley in massive, jagged piles that look like they were dropped from the sky. It does not look like a landslide. It looks like something exploded. And what is unsettling is that geologists still say parts of Turtle Mountain remain unstable, meaning something like this could, in theory, happen again. Spring Hill, Nova Scotia is different because it was not one disaster. It was a pattern. Coal mining defined the town. It provided jobs, stability, a reason for people to stay. But it also came with risk that never really went away. In 1958, one of the worst incidents happened. Deep underground, a sudden shift caused what miners call a bump, essentially a violent collapse inside the mine. Tunnels caved in, equipment was crushed. 75 miners were killed. Rescue operations lasted for days. Men were trapped underground, in complete darkness, with limited air, not knowing if anyone would reach them. Some survived for over a week before being pulled out. When they were finally rescued, the story spread across the world. People followed updates closely, waiting to hear who made it and who did not. But this was not the first disaster in Spring Hill, and that is what changed things. Because when something like this happens once, people rebuild. When it happens again and again, eventually people stop believing it will get better. Mining operations eventually shut down. The town still exists, but it never fully recovered. And even today, if you talk to people connected to Spring Hill, they do not just remember one event, they remember a series of them that slowly changed everything. Africville, Nova Scotia was not abandoned because of economics, and not because of natural disaster. It was removed. For over a century, Africville was a black community on the edge of Halifax. Families built homes, raised children, and created a strong sense of identity, despite being largely ignored by the city. There were no proper municipal services, no reliable water system. Industrial developments were placed nearby, making conditions worse. And then, in the 1960s, the decision was made. The community would be relocated. Homes were demolished. The church was destroyed. Families were moved out. And one detail keeps coming up, because it says a lot about how it was handled. In some cases, people's belongings were transported in garbage trucks. Not moving trucks, garbage trucks. Africville was erased. Today, it is widely recognized as one of the most significant examples of forced displacement in Canada. But at the time, it was framed as redevelopment. And what makes this different from the other places on this list is that people did not leave because they had to. They left because they were made to. Now go further north, to Great Bear Lake. Port Radium, Northwest Territories was not just a mine. It was part of something much bigger. During World War II, uranium extracted from this site was used in the Manhattan Project, including the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But the way that material was handled is where the story shifts. Indigenous Dene workers transported the ore. They carried it in sacks. They handled it directly. They were not given protective equipment. And they were not told what it was. Years later, many of those workers developed serious illnesses, including cancer. For a long time, there was little acknowledgement of what happened. The mine is now abandoned. But the connection between that site, the workers, and what that material was used for is still being talked about today. And for many families, the question has never really gone away. How much did people know, and when? In the 1950s, thousands of people in New Brunswick were told they had to leave. The government needed land for what would become CFB Gagetown. Entire communities were expropriated. Families who had lived on the land for generations were forced to relocate. Farms were abandoned. Churches were left behind. People were compensated, but many felt it did not come close to what they were losing. And again, this was not voluntary. People did not choose to leave. They were told they had to. And decades later, there are still ongoing conversations about whether those families were treated fairly, and whether anything should have been done differently. Across Canada, there are former residential school sites that no longer operate. Some buildings are gone entirely. For over a century, Indigenous children were taken from their families and placed in these schools. Many experienced abuse. Many never returned home. In recent years, investigations have uncovered unmarked graves at several sites. Places like Kamloops brought renewed attention to something that had been spoken about for generations. These are not abandoned places in the usual sense. They are places tied to events that are still being uncovered as the truth was hidden for so long. And for many communities, these are not historical sites. They are still part of the present. They still have impact today. Val-Jalbert, Quebec feels almost staged. It sits near a waterfall and looks like something from a film set. But it was real. a pulp and paper town that thrived in the early 1900s. It had homes, a school, a general store, everything you would expect. Then the industry declined. The mill shut down, and people left. What makes it unusual is how much is still there. Houses remain. Some still have furniture. Curtains hang in the windows. It does not feel abandoned in the usual way. It feels paused. And when you walk through it, the strange part is not what is missing. It's what is still there. During the Cold War, a network of radar stations was built across the Arctic. The goal was to detect incoming Soviet aircraft. These sites were built quickly, in extremely remote areas. When the Cold War ended, many were abandoned. Some were cleaned up. Others were not. Structures, equipment, and materials were left behind, exposed to harsh conditions. Over time, they deteriorated. They are still out there, scattered across the north. And because of how remote they are, most people will never see them, even though they played a major role in global defense strategy. Before Kitsalt, there was Ankos, British Columbia, another company town built around a copper smelter. At its peak, it had thousands of residents. Then in 1935, a fire destroyed the smelter. Without it, the town had no purpose, and within months, people began leaving. Buildings were abandoned, infrastructure was left behind. Over time, it faded. Today, very little remains, but at one point, it was a fully functioning town. And like Kitsalt, it shows how quickly a place can go from active to empty when everything depends on one thing. What connects all of these places is not just that they were abandoned, it's how quickly things changed. In some cases, people had time to prepare. In others, they did not. Some left because the economy collapsed. Others were forced out. Some were working in conditions they did not fully understand until years later. Across Canada, there are more places like this than most people realize. Some are preserved, some are buried, some are still being talked about. And once you know what happened in them, they stop feeling like empty places. They start to feel like something that was interrupted,